Hey everyone, today we're talking about quiet quitting. I'm Alex, I'm a former 9-to-5er turned life coach, and I'm here to help you diversify your income, get on your path to purpose, and leave your 9-to-5. We're going to talk about what quiet quitting is, why you might want to quiet quit, what might keep you from quiet quitting, and how to actually start quiet quitting. So what is quiet quitting? For me, it's quietly reducing the amount of effort you put in at work back to a baseline. It means no longer overachieving, staying late, or trying to exceed expectations at work. It's doing exactly what you were hired to do while doing good work and having a good attitude. For me, quiet quitting isn't slacking off or scaling back to the bare minimum not to lose your job. So why do we need quiet quitting? Well, the effort you put in at work can be viewed like a spectrum. And there's the one end of the spectrum where you're not working very hard, and there's the other end of the spectrum where you're overexerting yourself. And for me, too many people are on the overexertion end of the spectrum in the hopes of success or making more money at their job, and to me, this is just a gamble. While I agree that hard work and dedication is needed to make things happen in life, when you aren't your own boss, you aren't really in control of how well you do. You're just hoping that your hard work will reflect in your paycheck, your raises, your bonuses, and how fast you move up the ladder. When we first start a job, we understand the parameters of our employment. We know that we're going to be working about 40 hours a week. We know the hours that we're expected to work, let's say between 9 to 5. We know how much money we'll make and our benefits, if any. Slowly over time, though, we're conditioned to think that we need to work harder in order to succeed. Either this is societally conditioned into you, maybe your parents have conditioned this into you, or you just observe others at work and you see those where you want to be at work, working hard, staying late, and working on weekends. So why do people put in so much extra effort at work? Well, a couple things come to mind, the first one being success in your career and quickly moving up the corporate ladder. Another thing is making more money. People hope that by working harder, you'll get that year-end raise, and you may even get a year-end bonus if your company offers that. So what's the problem with this approach? So the first problem with this is that climbing the corporate ladder is often glamorized. Yes, you become the boss and you get to make more money, but you often take on far more responsibility, you have to supervise staff, and you get pulled into a lot more meetings and corporate politics. And like I mentioned earlier, I think that working harder in the hopes of getting a raise or a bonus at the end of the year is just a gamble. Ultimately, those decisions are made by upper management and have a lot to do with how well the companies did that year. So now that we've talked about why you might want to quiet quit, let's talk about the problems people have when they're trying to set boundaries at work. First problem being that a lot of people don't actually know how to set boundaries at work, and so we'll talk about that a little bit later in this video. The second thing that might keep people from setting boundaries at work is fear. Fear of being reprimanded, fear of losing your job, or fear of appearances. You don't want to look lazy or stand out at work. So quickly before we get into talking about how to actually start quiet quitting, I want to talk about why you might want to start quiet quitting. A lot of people are looking for better work-life balance. They want more time with friends and family, and they also want to have more time to spend the money that they're making. Others are really drained and they want to feel creative and inspired again in their free time. Or you may not be passionate about your job anymore, or you have a manager that you don't like. Maybe you don't see a future with that company, and so you've decided to quiet quit until a better opportunity comes along down the line. Or lastly, maybe you want more time and energy to put into starting your own side hustle. And I have my own story with quiet quitting. I actually started quiet quitting back in about 2019 before it was even called quiet quitting. I knew I was ready to leave my career as an engineer, and I was starting the process of figuring out what I was passionate about and what my next steps would be. For me, I knew I wanted to start a side hustle before leaving my job, but my problem was that I was super tired whenever I'd get home from work. Some days I would even need to lay on the bed for about half an hour after work just to recharge and regain functionality. At the time, I felt I had no energy or creativity to put into a side hustle. I knew something needed to change, and I started implementing better boundaries at work so that I had my time and my energy back. So before I tell you how I started quiet quitting, I want to put a few disclaimers on this conversation because my situation was unique to me and maybe different from yours. So the first disclaimer was that I wasn't in a high pressure situation. I had a lot of freedom at work, I worked independently, and I wasn't micromanaged. I didn't have the pressure to meet a billable hour target. And lastly, I wasn't a supervisor. I was at the worker bee level, which allowed me to fly a little bit better under the radar. As far as my personal situation, I wasn't responsible for anyone but myself. I had no dependents, and the potential impacts of quiet quitting were worth the risk to me. And lastly, I knew I wasn't staying at this job. I wasn't trying to stand out, get ahead, or climb the corporate ladder in any way. Rather, I knew I was leaving this job, and so I was just trying to put my head down, do good work, pay down my debt, and build up my side hustle. Okay, so let's finally talk about how to start quiet quitting. The basics of quiet quitting is figuring out where you need to set boundaries at work and then figuring out how to actually set those boundaries. So my first tip is to establish a schedule that actually works for you. If you have the flexibility, figure out when you want to start every day, when you want to take your lunch, and when you want to leave every day. When you're consistent, your coworkers will start to get to know your schedule. And my second tip is to use time blocking. So this one's going to help you with your first tip of setting your own schedule. So what this looks like is just blocking out time in your calendar when you don't want people to book you for meetings. So if you start work at 8 every day or at 9 every day, block out time before that time in your schedule, and that encourages people not to set meetings then. Block out your lunch hour and block out time after your end of day. So if you want to leave work at 4 every day, try and block out time from 4 till 6 to encourage people not to set meetings at that time. I really like the time blocking method because it's a great visual cue for anyone who goes into your calendar, and it lets them know that you're someone who sets boundaries at work. The next thing I did, and your third tip, is to use flex time. And so what I mean by flex time is if you have a meeting that goes into your lunch hour, say the meeting goes over by half an hour into your lunch hour, take that time back. Don't just lose the half hour. Or if you have a meeting that happens to get scheduled over your lunch hour, try and take your lunch either before or after that meeting. As soon as you know that you have a meeting that's going over your lunch hour or over your end of day, try and block out time in your schedule to take that time back. So this could look like a longer lunch, or maybe coming in late one day or leaving early one day. And I know this one can be a little controversial, but if you have a pretty flexible manager and a pretty flexible employer in general, then you can probably get away with this. For me, little things like taking an early or a late lunch hour because I have a meeting wasn't even something that I needed to talk to my manager about. It was sort of just expected. If for whatever reason you have to work on an evening or a weekend and you're a regular Monday to Friday 9 to 5 type of worker, then I definitely encourage you to try and take that time back as well. So if you had to go to an event one night for 2 hours during a weekday, maybe you leave 2 hours early on Friday afternoon. This one might actually require that you mention to your supervisor that you want to leave 2 hours early on Friday because you worked for 2 hours during the week. But this is totally up to you, and you have to gauge your own situation and your understanding of your own employer. My next tip has to do with professional development and things like lunch and learns. I see way too many people skipping out on their lunches because they've attended a lunch and learn, and the expectation is that they get back to work right after that. But lunch and learns are professional development, so I was not in the habit of using a lunch and learn as my lunch hour. I would attend a lunch and learn, I would attend the professional development, and then I would take my lunch after. This one may be one of my more controversial tips, but I definitely encourage you to explore this and really ask yourself if an hour of your time is worth 2 slices of pizza. For me, professional development that supports my current job happens on work time. If you're taking professional development for your own interest or because you're trying to make a career move, then that happens on your time. My next tip is to set space between you and the office, both physically and digitally. For this one, you can start by taking your lunch away from your desk or the lunchroom. Go for a walk or just try and get away from the office. This will give you a mental break and it'll keep people from coming to grab you during your lunch hour if anything comes up. As far as setting some digital space between you and the office, do not check your emails on evenings and weekends. So the big one here is to avoid getting a work phone at all costs. A work phone represents the expectation that you'll be available at all times. It's easy to justify not checking your email from your home computer, but when you have a work phone, it's expected that you'll answer the phone and check your emails. So my next tip is the most in line with the traditional idea of quiet quitting, and that is to start scaling back on the amount of effort you put in at work. The way to start doing this is to start doing a reasonable amount of work each week. And I know reasonable may sound arbitrary, but what would be a decent amount of work that you could get done in the week that would both be fair to your employer and fair to you? So let's say you've narrowed it down to 3 things that you believe to be a reasonable and fair amount of work for that week. If someone comes up to you with a last-minute task, it's not your job to squeeze it in because you've already decided what's a fair amount of work. So instead you ask them what they would like you to drop in exchange for doing that new project. Most of the time there won't be a shortage of work, so there's no reason to rush through onto the next thing. And the second way to start scaling back your effort at work is to not be the junk drawer. And what I mean by this is don't be the office fixer. Don't be the person that people can always come to with last-minute tasks and you'll save the day. You'll be the fixer. So the way that you start this is simply by saying, unfortunately, I'm too busy to take that on this week. Or you use my previous tip and you ask them what other work they would like you to drop in exchange for this new task. The benefit here, especially if you're kind of known as the office fixer and the person that people come to, is that once you start saying no, people are going to assume that you're really busy. Because in the past, you've always said yes to these things, so you must be so busy that you really can't squeeze these things in anymore. So it's actually going to have the perception that you're busier than you are, when in reality, you're just setting better boundaries at work and you're doing a reasonable amount of work each week. And don't worry, the work will get done. They'll either decide that it's actually not that important and they'll drop it entirely, or they'll go find someone else to do it. So here's a summary of all the tips covered in this video. Set a schedule and stick to it. Use time blocking to help you set your schedule, as well as give a visual cue to your coworkers that you're someone who has boundaries at work. Use flex time to make up lost time, such as meetings going over your lunch hour. Only do professional development during work hours. Only be available for work during work hours and avoid checking your email after work. Scale back on the amount of work you do in a week to a reasonable amount and continue to meet deadlines. So in conclusion, keep doing good work, keep having a good attitude. This is really just about setting boundaries and doing a reasonable amount of work each week. Ultimately, if you leave this job, you want to leave on good terms and you want people to have a positive impression of you when you leave. Alright, so I hope everyone enjoyed this video this week. If you did, make sure to leave a like, make sure to subscribe, and leave a comment below and letting me know if you've started implementing these tips in your life. And I'll see you in the next video.